I was helping out my aunt at her house. Yeah, she was paying me. I was basically just cleaning stuff up, cooking dinner for her and her kids. But what I did not expect to happen was she decides to give me my paycheck at the end of the week, and guess what? Only half of the money was there. So I confront her about it, and she has this to say.
Family can sometimes be overrated. I don't blame people who don't place undue loyalty to it. I'm the only child of my parents who are not really well-to-do. Ever since I could work, it has always been all hands on deck. Everyone has had to contribute something for the family's survival. There were times where we would be in serious need and my father would start calling his siblings. I never saw my mother for once pick up the phone to call her sister Sharon. She rarely spoke about her sister, except for when her sister lost her husband and she traveled to spend some time with her. Aunt Sharon is a widow with 5 kids. I don't think her relationship with my mom is so great because they weren't really close. I guess if they were, my mom would have reached out to her numerous times when we needed help. I was almost done with high school when I saw Aunt Sharon for the first time. She came to visit us and she looked nothing like a widow. As a matter of fact, my mother, whose husband was alive, looked more like a widow than her sister. Aunt Sharon was the deal. She had weight, which was felt whenever she went by. By that, I mean she had money. Her late husband had left behind some money and 5 kids who I would later discover were absolutely spoiled rotten. I was surprised my mother had a sister who was loaded like Aunt Sharon, and yet there were nights when we went to bed on an empty stomach. I felt my mother was just being unnecessarily reserved. I called it her ego. How naive I was. It never occurred to me that the fact my mom kept her distance from her sister meant she was avoiding something. Well, I was impressed by Aunt Sharon's visit that day. So, when she invited me to come over to her house and come spend my next holiday, I eagerly looked forward to it. The next holiday soon arrived, and I told my parents about my desire to go stay at my aunt's place. My father was indifferent, but my mother was outrightly against it. She did not give me any satisfactory reason why I was not going to go. She just said it was not a good idea. Well, I thought otherwise, so I began making a fuss all over the house till my mother got fed up and asked me to go if I wanted to. Well, I wanted to, and I did. I got to my aunt's house, and her house was palatial. I wondered how she could be living alone in such a grand palace with just 5 kids. To my amazement, there was no house help around. My aunt's excuse was that she had to fire the last one a few weeks back when she discovered the housekeeper was stealing. I bought the excuse. I was eager to impress, so I quickly took on the job of a cleaner. What I mean is, I did the house chores. I was older than my aunt's eldest child, but they did not join in or help at all in any way. They rather made the house a mess while I cleaned up after them. I did not attach much meaning to it. I just saw it as, quote, big uncle helping out his cousins. The more I worked, the more my aunt commanded me, and I promised to get some more help as soon as possible so I could be relieved from this. I stayed at my aunt's place for a month, and she never got a housekeeper. After my stay was over and I was about to take my leave, my aunt was depressed, and this was because she said that she would miss me. I was so stupid to think she was going to miss me. I never knew that she would, miss the free service that I offered her. She gave me an amount of cash, and for someone who had not handled much, it felt like a lot. I thanked her while promising to come back when next I had the opportunity. I went back home eager to prove my mother wrong that her hunch, or whatever it was about my stay at her sister's place turning out bad, was wrong. My parents said nothing. I soon rounded up my high school and got admission into college, but there was a problem. There was no money to pay for the acceptance fee, much less start college. My parents did not need to over-sympathize the fact that there was no money. I did not need anyone to tell me it's obvious. They did try to borrow from friends and acquaintances, but it simply was not successful. I suggested that we spoke to Aunt Sharon about it, but my mother quickly kicked against the idea. I could not understand for the life of me why my mother would have a sister who could foot the bills of my school, and yet she refused to tell her about it. I called Aunt Sharon behind their back. I told her about the challenge I was facing, and she seemed very sympathetic over the phone. She promised to call my parents and offer some form of support. I knew my parents, my mom especially, would be angry with me for reaching out to Aunt Sharon behind their backs, but I didn't care. They could scold me as long as Aunt Sharon would have been involved in the matter. So, Aunt Sharon called my mother and relayed her interest in helping me out. Well, what she said was that I should come over to her house so we could see what could be done about it. As expected, my mom was not pleased with what I've done, but I had twisted the arm of my parents, and so they just let me have my way. I think they just wanted to leave me to learn by experience myself. I picked a few of my clothing articles and head straight to my aunt's place. I got to my aunt's place, and it was the same situation as before. She had not gotten a housekeeper yet. Well, I didn't give it much thought, as I felt I was only there for 3 days at most. My aunt returned from work, and throughout the 3 days that I was supposed to spend there, she evaded having the school discussion with me. I would not sit back and do nothing while staying there, so the cycle of me cleaning after her spoiled, rotten children resumed. I grew impatient on the 5th day, as the time to pay the acceptance fee was running low. I approached her in her room and established the discussion. She told me that she had not been avoiding me on purpose. She claimed that she had been running around to see how she could raise money for my acceptance and school fee. The school fee and acceptance were not an amount so great my aunt could not generate it with ease, though. She was heading the human resources department or a big firm, and from all indications her salary was gigantic. I asked her to give me the acceptance alone, so that way I could secure admissions while she ran around for the fees or whatever she called it. She promised to do so in a few days, but she never did. I was forced to talk to her again about it. I had just 2 days left to secure my admission spot by paying the acceptance fee, and she said that it was difficult for her to raise the money since the month was far from coming to an end. She suggested that I stayed with her and served as a housekeeper while she paid me monthly. She claimed that I could save up enough money to get into college the next year. The implication of what my aunt was saying was that I had to sit out a college this year. I asked myself what the help she claimed she would offer me was. She was basically asking me to work for her while she paid me. I was not happy, but I did not have much of a choice. So, I called my parents to tell them that I would be applying for admission next year, but I would spend my time working at my aunt's place to raise up some money. My parents did not discourage me over the phone. They knew my mind was made up, and for someone who had just turned 18, I was responsible for myself. Aunt Sharon made the sign of the letter of an appointment for the position of housekeeping. She had successfully manipulated me into becoming her housekeeper, simply because she was not willing to give me money for free. She has to pay me $1,800 a month, and I was supposed to save it up for next year when I could finally gain admission to college. I had like a whole year on my hands, but it was not easy at my aunt's place, let me tell you. She changed to something else the moment I signed the appointment letter. The work in the house absolutely doubled. She overworked me. I guess she felt she had the right to, as she was now paying me. I did not complain, though. I did my best to keep up with everything. But resentment began growing inside of me. The character flaws of her children, which I overlooked before now, seemed to be staring at me. It was clear that there was zero home training and that their mother did not care. She even went as far as reintroducing me to them as their new housekeeper. You should have seen the children's faces and their attitude after their mother's declaration. If they had their way, I would spoon-feed the 5 of them and maybe help them breathe in air, as they're probably too lazy to even do that. I failed at ignoring them. It was just impossible. I lashed out at the oldest child one day after he had his lunch and refused to take his plate to the kitchen. He just wanted to go sit in front of his video games till when dinner was ready. So I called his attention and asked him to take his dishes into the kitchen, but his reply startled me. He said he couldn't do it, so while I was around, as his mother had told them, I was the housekeeper. Guys, this boy is 15 years old, and I was not asking him to wash the plate he used to eat. I only asked him if he could take it to the kitchen. He had never seen me react the way I did that day. I scolded him at the top of my voice, and he speedily attended to the dish, ran to his room, and locked himself up there till his mother got home. The rest of the siblings avoided me too after that. Aunt Sharon came back home, and her kids told her what happened. She was furious. She called me in the presence of her children, and I was initially glad she asked my side of the story. It was the same as what her children had told her, but to my amazement, she lashed at me, right in front of them. She rebuked me by saying I was there to keep the house clean and not train her children, who, according to her, were very well trained. I was disappointed, to say the least. It was then I began wondering if I had made a mistake by coming to work for her. The whole drama with her kids happened during my 3rd month as her cleaner, and at the end of the month, Aunt Sharon walked into my room that morning before leaving for work and threw an envelope at my face. I knew it was my paycheck, so I thanked her for it, even though it was my right. While she left the room like she had just done me a favor, I lazily opened the envelope with the expectation to find the usual amount I was paid, but my expectation was cut short. I saw $900? This was half of what I was supposed to be paid. I ran after Aunt Sharon just before she got into the car to inform her that she's made a big mistake. I told her that she's made a mistake by underpaying me, but she claimed that she made no mistake, so I told her she had paid me half of what I was due, but to my amazement, she said I was paid exactly what I was due. She went on to say that I had not been working hard of lately, and I was taking advantage of the fact that my employer was my family. She then proceeded to tell me that it would be the new norm from then on, and she would pay me half of the agreed amount each month if I fell short of my duties. Well, I looked in shock as she got into her car and drove off. I was trying to process how and when I had refused to work simply because my boss was my aunt. So I got to my room and anger shot through the roof. I did not do any work that day. I just wrote my resignation letter and waited for her to come back so I could submit it before taking my leave. Aunt Sharon came back that evening, but I did not tell her my decision yet. I could not leave her house that night anyway, so I impatiently waited till daybreak. As soon as daybreak, I did not bother myself with trying to get the kids ready for school and all. I went straight to her room and told her of my desire to leave while handing her my resignation letter. She didn't even bother reading the letter, but I could see she was not happy with my decision. She asked what was my reason for wanting to leave her home, and I told her I felt cheated. Aunt Sharon flared up the moment I mentioned I was cheated. She said she was the one who was cheated because she was paying and feeding me when I was supposed to cater for myself. So, I politely told Aunt Sharon I was no longer interested in this and that she could get someone else if she wanted to. She began hurling insults at me left and right. I did not stay to keep a record of all the trash that was coming out of her mouth, though. I just took my bags and left for home. She could run it whichever way she saw fit. I don't care. I got to my home and my parents were surprised to see me. I had not informed them about my fallout with my aunt, but they suspected it as much because everyone who has ever lived with my aunt has fallen out with her. After listening to me tell the sad tale about my days at Aunt Sharon's place, my parents began to laugh at me. I didn't blame them, though. I would not have had the ugly experience if I listened to them in the first place. When they had laughed to their full, my mother then began to tell me about her experience with her sister. I froze from the inside out as my mom told me childhood stories about the kind of person her sister was. It made perfect sense that my mother had kept her distance all these years. My mom described her sister to be one who loved using people for her gain, without caring about what became of them at the end of the day. Beyond the whole childhood stories, my mother explained that the reason my aunt did not have a maid or worker at home was that her reputation as being cruel, a cheater, had been spreading around for some time, so it was difficult for her to ever get staff. My mom went further to say that my aunt would not help anyone who was at the point of death without what she could get out of it. I didn't need anyone to validate what my mom's told me. I'd seen it myself. I would be sure to listen to my parents the next time, though. My parents asked that I did not go around talking about my experience at my aunt's place. They said it was only a matter of time before she got served what she deserved. I'm currently looking for a job, as I need to save up very fast. Don't worry, I've learnt my lesson. I'm never working for anything close to family again. Not in this life or the next. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So, I thought that was the end of the story, but I found a whole nother posting from the same person with multiple updates, and if you think it just got real, you've seen nothing yet. I hope you guys are enjoying your day so far. If you're new to the channel, the best way to support me for daily videos is so simple. Press that subscribe button underneath this video right now so you always get notified when a new video drops. And here's update number 1. Wow, I had a drama-filled weekend, let me tell you about it. This is thanks to my aunt. She paid a visit to my parents and me just 2 days after I left her home. She did not inform them before she came, she just drove into our compound like she was coming to make an arrest. Well, she could have done so if it was in her power, as she called me a criminal. Aunt Sharon got into the house and began shouting at my parents to produce the criminal they called a son. I am the only child of my parents, so she was definitely referring to me. My dad was careful to not meddle in what he called women's affairs. He rather let my mother handle the matter as if it was her widowed sister we were dealing with. My mother tried acting normal and sane. She asked her younger sister what the issue was, and Aunt Sharon began laying all sorts of allegations on me. I was shocked when she said I'd been stealing from her right from the first day I stepped into her house. I was listening in on the conversation after Mom asked that I not show my face. My aunt was busy spewing lies that she had taken time to prepare. I was not surprised, as my mother told me she would always have a form of accusation levied on whomever she had issues with. I was just letting my mother deal with the situation until my aunt said I got abusive with her children. I immediately came out to denounce what she was saying, and my aunt got physical and gave me a dirty slap. Though my mother did not fall for my aunt's lies. She had initially behaved civilized, but the moment she saw her younger sister slap me, she returned the favor. I never knew my mom could be so fierce. I was really glad she gave my aunt 2 dirty slaps, because I was trained to never lay a finger on a woman, and if I have done that, it would only validate what my aunt was saying about me being violent. My mother and aunt were locked in a fight, with my mother pinning her to the ground. I can say I was enjoying the whole show, as it felt good, seeing Aunt Sharon finally get what she deserved. But my father, who had initially decided to stay out of it, had to intervene now. Aunt Sharon has my father's intervention to thank, because she would have been unrecognizable by the time my mom was done creamed corn. It took my father a while to calm my mom down, while Aunt Sharon just rained abuses above all of us. My mother threatened to give her a second round of beating if she stayed around and kept running her mouth, and that's when she left us with the promise of having the whole of us arrested. We weren't scared of the threat, though. We knew that they were empty promises. She had no justifiable reason to have us arrested. Dad had acted like he was not in support of how my mother had reacted, but the moment Aunt Sharon had left the scene, I could hear him laugh loudly from his room. Well, it's been 2 days since my aunt got beaten up, and we've neither seen nor heard any word from the police. Just like I noted, her threats are empty. Update number 2. It's been 8 months since my last update. Yeah, 8 long months. This is not because I've been locked up or anything, but my aunt or anything of those sorts, no. It's simply because nothing serious happened. Well, I got admitted into college and I've paid the acceptance fee finally. There's enough money to see me start my freshman year without monetary distractions, but I know I would need money from somewhere along the line. I feel at ease, though, as the financial burden would not be so heavy on my parents. That being said, there's a reason for this update. I received a call from my aunt last week. I didn't know what to expect when I saw the phone ringing. I felt she was trying to start another round of quarrels or abuses, but the reverse was the case. My aunt was talking like the issue we had, or still have, never existed. She claimed she wanted to check up on me to find out how I and my parents were doing. This was strange, but I had to play along. I told her things were great, and she asked that I sent her my account details so she could send me something to keep me going. I promised to do that, but I had already learned my lesson to know that my aunt was a snake who would not do something except when she needed something and there's something in it for her. So, I told my parents about it, and they suspected that she was up to something. I expected my mom to ask me not to bother sending my details, but she surprisingly told me to do it. They warned me not to reveal to her things concerning us, like the fact that I've gotten admission. I sent the details to my aunt without much of an expectation, but to my surprise, I received a credit alert from my bank in less than 1 day. My aunt had credited me the sum of $2,000. I didn't know what to make of it. I began thinking about what she could want in return. Several suggestions began flooding my mind, but none of them seemed to be adding up. I delivered the news to my parents, and though they could not figure out why my aunt's game plan was like this, they asked that I could call her to thank her for something which would keep me going. Well, I did as my parents asked, and my aunt, to my surprise, said she was sorry about the way things had turned out between her and my family the last time. My aunt's threat never scared any of us, but her apology made us feel very uncomfortable. "This isn't my sister," my mother exclaimed. Aunt Sharon was one to hold a grudge. My mother claimed it was either something that had made her sister change her mind, or her sister was up to something very fishy. Aunt Sharon's been calling me almost every day since she sent the money. I don't know if she's trying to create or establish some kind of bond between us. The thought of alone is just so scary. She last called me yesterday and asked that I extended her regards to my parents. Up until now, I can't say what her plan is, but I'm certain I would not be falling for it. I won't be fooled twice. Update number 3. Wow, I should have listened to y'all. The snake is finally revealing itself. Aunt Sharon called my parents 5 days ago to apologize for how things have turned out between us. She informed me that she was coming to visit. True to her words, she came visiting and she did not come empty-handed. She claimed that she had not been at peace with herself ever since she fought with my mother, who's the only surviving family she has. We could see right through her. She was setting the stage for manipulation, but once bitten, twice shy. We were not falling for it. My parents played along. They received her warmly, and before leaving, she asked that I should come visit her even if it's just for a day. The scenario seemed awfully familiar. This was the same brief visit that she talked about the first time when she tricked me into working for her. So I promised I would when I could, but I did not give it much thought. Well, the promise had been made, and that was my mistake. She began calling multiple times a day to find out when I was coming. I finally decided I was going to honor my word, even if it meant going over there just for a few hours. I finally went to her place, and the whole house was disgusting. It smelled like disease. Her untrained kids were there, and they were not looking like they were well taken care of. If they had been trained properly by their mom, then they could have at least had enough sense to know they looked untidy and needed to clean up. For the first time since I knew them, she made them greet and address me with respect. I knew something was up. After the whole pleasantries, my aunt and I began talking. It was at that time she came clean about why she had been putting up the charade all along. You see, Aunt Sharon said her work for some months had simply been too demanding, and it caused her to neglect her children. It was as though she could read the lingering thoughts on my mind about her getting a maid for help, and she quickly said that it was difficult finding someone to trust nowadays. She claimed she only felt safe knowing her kids were under the supervision of a family member. Aunt Sharon pleaded with me to come back to her house and help her with taking care of the kids. She promised to increase the pay and not short pay me no matter the circumstances. I asked myself about all the accusations she made against me a few months ago. I'd barely vowed since my first experience to never, ever, ever work for family again. Besides, I've gotten admission, and it's pointless coming to work for her as I'd be leaving for school in just 2 weeks. I didn't want to tell her about it, and I wanted to get back at her for how she treated me, so I devised a plan. I told my aunt that I would love to work for her, but I need some money to deal with some pressing needs at home, after which I would come to stay with her. Aunt Sharon was super desperate to have me come work for her, so she asked that I found out the total amount it would cost me to get things fixed. She just wants to foot the bill, so I would come live with her ASAP. I would call her tomorrow and tell her an amount that could probably scare her away. Update number 4. I'm making this update from college. Yeah, I finally got into college, but let me not skip the most important part of my story, my revenge. I told my parents about the discussion I had with Aunt Sharon. They were not surprised she was being super nice because she wanted to lure me to work for her again, but they were angry at the fact that she would resort to her usual self once I agreed to do so. I informed my parents of what I told my aunt about needing to fix some things with money before I could come over to her house. I got my parents in on a plan, and they did not object. They believed that since Aunt Sharon wanted to play smart, I was simply going to play her game. I called my aunt to inform her that it would cost me around $5,000 to put my things in order. I felt the amount would make her change her mind about me, but she sent me the money very quickly. Well, I added it to what I saved up for school and began avoiding my Aunt Sharon's phone calls. After my aunt had failed for 2 weeks to reach me via mobile phone or through my parents, she drove down to our house. The day she came coincided with the day I was leaving for school. She got into the house to find all my bags packed. I was already 2 weeks behind our agreement, and she somehow felt I packed my things to come over to her house. You should have seen the look on her face when my parents informed her that, oh no, I'm going to school. My aunt simply could not make sense of what my parents were saying, so she turned to me in a puzzled look and asked for explanations. I told her that I'd recently gotten admission and had accepted it. I apologized for not telling her earlier, though I attributed it to having a lot of things on my mind. My aunt was angered. She asked why I had collected money from her and promised to come to live with her when I knew I was seeking admission. My mother, who was enjoying the look of anger and disappointment on her sister's face, told her to think of her money as being invested in my future. Aunt Sharon asked what the fate of her and her children would be now since she had invested in my future. She asked when I would be around for the holidays so I could come over, as she could not risk quitting her job to take care of her kids. But my mother wasted no time in telling her that I was never going to set foot in her home again, not even during holiday periods. My mother made her understand that one should not take the family for granted simply because they're family. My aunt left in anger. There was nothing that she could do. She could not ask me to repay the money, as there was no formal agreement in place before giving it to me. My aunt recently quit her job to take care of her kids, and she could not let them on their own, as Child Protective Services could have taken them away. Well, that chapter of my life of my aunt has come to an end. It's now time for me to focus on my career. Thank you guys for all the support in the comment section.
So, something happened in the comment section of this one that took me by surprise, to be honest. A lot of people were giving OP flack, saying, hey, what were you thinking, going ahead and basically scamming your aunt at the end of this? Well, I don't know, I thought the aunt deserved what she had coming, but maybe I'm being a little bit too revengeful, so let me know what you think. Do you think at the end of the story, OP went too far by agreeing to go back and help, be the helper again, and get paid $5,000 up front, and then decided to not show? Is that too petty, or do you think that this aunt deserved it after everything that OP had to go through? So, drop your comments down below. Let's discuss this one in the comment section. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, the best way to support me is super simple. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel for daily videos. Remember, it's cool to be kind. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya!